Hello, my name is Stephen Cox, and I'm giving this video, which is my thoughts on 5 novels, all of which happen to be by women, and that have impressed me in the last 12 months or so, perhaps slightly more in the case of one of them, and to draw out some of the themes that they have. I think that the interesting thing about getting a more diverse range of people to write books than male, pale, and stale is that people process reality differently, they have different experiences, and even a story that you think has been well done can come across as very different if it's been done by somebody who has a different perspective on the world. There's also practical reason, there's no particular reason why we should be happy with the situation where only one group of people can make money and have success from any profession, really, while another group can't. So these are genuinely books that impress me. I've also got some novellas that have impressed me and a whole lot of other books. So I might do several of these videos. So that's a rather boring introduction. So I think the first one I want to start with is the only one I actually got free from the publisher to review it. And that is The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And she's a well-known author, but new to me when I read this. It's got a lovely cover in the real book. And it basically takes the classic H.G. Wells story of the island of Dr. Moreau, where Dr. Moreau is a crazy scientist who is trying to make people out of animals. And it's really gloomy and tropical. And, it's H.G. Wells having a go at vivisection, which was and is controversial. I think that this is a wonderful retake of it. I think it's actually in many ways an improvement on the original book. What Moreno-Garcia does is she resets it to the middle of a big indigenous rising in Mexico in the late 19th century. And our heroine is the daughter of an estate manager, somebody who manages the estate but doesn't actually own it. And so she's trapped in a sort of the aristocratic thing. Really, she has to make the right decision about who she marries. Her father's very keen for her to marry the well-polished but cruel guy up from the city, or she might favour the rather run-down Englishman who does a lot of the hard work around the and drunk and so forth. So that's the setup. But Moreau's experiments are actually producing hybrids, and one of the reasons why the book works is that the hybrids are people with personalities and character and so on, and therefore, although they look non-human, and that makes the whole thing much more interesting. So you've both got the struggle of class and race, and the morality of what Dr. Moreau does, who is a fairly immoral scientist in the Dr. Frankenstein genre, and the hybrids struggle to be treated as equal, and in fact, the daughters struggle to be treated as equal. So it transfers well. It's got some sort of tropical lushness. I think she's a great writer. It's very evocative. It's not entirely predictable what happens, and it allows you to think about a lot of deep things, and there are characters you care about. So what more do you want than that? So that's the Daughter of Dr. Moreau, highly recommended. I've also read her Mexican Gothic, which is one of the books that helped make her name. I have to say that this was more classic horror, Gothic house in the mountains horror, and that's great. Lots of people like that. Less my bag, so I wasn't quite so happy with that one, but it's very well done for what it is. The next one I'm doing is Unnatural Creatures by Kris Waldherr, and this is a rewrite of the famous novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which manages both to be a foundational text of science fiction and a foundational text of modern horror. So it's a very interesting book, the original, and also it's a book, unless you've read it, you don't actually know the Frankenstein story, because what you really know in your head is the film Frankenstein, which is a much curtailed version and less philosophical and more about the gore. But so what Kris Waldherr does is she rewrites it from the view of 3 women, and that is, let me get this right, Catherine, who is Victor Frankenstein's mother, Elizabeth, who is his wife-to-be and ultimately his wife, and Justine, who is a poor, orphaned, hunchback servant who is nanny to the children, and is in many ways the most interesting of the three point of view characters. And she grounds it much more firmly in the fact that there's revolutionary ferment going on at the very moment that Frankenstein is supposed to be set. So the revolution's going on, and also the scientific revolution. And the key point in the original and this book is that Victor Frankenstein has to move away from alchemy, i.e. magic, to using science in order to achieve what he wants to do. That's really interesting because for me, the central struggle of the original book, the original Frankenstein, is the creation of the monster, who is arguably only a monster because he's treated as one. And what happens in this book is you get three much more strongly drawn female characters who have more complex motivations. There's a lot of stuff going on, and you know that Victor Frankenstein is off building the creature, and you know why people keep getting murdered, but the people in the book don't know. So that's quite interesting. But this change of perspective is really interesting. I like the film Ophelia because by retelling Hamlet from Ophelia's viewpoint, it becomes clear that actually Hamlet is a really obsessed guy who isn't actually thinking about the consequences of what he's doing. And that obsession is very, very destructive, which is, of course, also what Victor Frankenstein's up to. But the monster does turn up, and we become clear that Victor Frankenstein is destroying everyone around him by his determination to create life. So the book kind of follows the plot. It adds things that aren't in the book. It is, the further it goes on, the more different it is. So it won't spoil anything for you, though you should read the original. It's brilliantly written. I mean, you know, it's very gothic. So there's always a crow taking off or a finger being pricked at just the moment you need to be reminded. It really points to the oppression of women, even in these revolutionary times. Famously, the French revolutionaries executed France's leading feminist woman for daring to suggest that the Declaration of Rights of Man should also have rights of women in it as well. So it has a modern understanding, but the characters live within the times they're in. It's a beautiful piece of historical writing. It will be different from the film. It will be different from the book, but I heartily recommend it. So there we go. Mind you, I'm not going to do a video about a book I don't heartily recommend, am I? I'm not that type of person. So the third one is, this one's been around for a while, Circe by Madeleine Miller, which is a retelling of Greek myths, but it's a retelling of Greek myth through the eyes of Circe, who's the evil sorceress. And this is very interesting because I was really interested in Greek myth when I was a kid. And then as I got more where I was sexually, I also got very interested in lots of other aspects of Greek culture. And the Greek myths are really, there's no belief in them that the gods are good. You worship them because you need to placate them. They are amoral, really. Zeus in particular is an absolute piece of work. Serial rapist. You know, all the gods are quite capable of turning you into a toad at a moment's notice, or making you suffer some awful punishment. So what Circe does, who is obviously seen as the bad woman in the Odysseus story, because she turns all his men into pigs, this creates her as a being, sets her in the creation myth, shows how awful the Greek gods are, and like any retelling that's doesn't just exult in the slaughter, but also talks about the consequences of the slaughter, talks about the people who get the short end of the stick in this world. And it's wonderful. I mean, there have been lots of retellings of myths by different people from different perspectives. Apparently the publishers are now starting to get a bit tired of them. I still think they've got something to teach us. So that's Circe, which I recommend. So The Great Gatsby is one of those great books that American students are required to read, and some English ones as well. And it talks about the jazz age and how hollow and dreadful it all was. And I think that this is a chance to talk about Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May, who has written a couple of thrillers under another name, but this is definitely her best book and what she should be writing. In essence, it's a sapphic witches retelling of the Great Gatsby. In the Great War, one of the great horrible things that happened was magic, and people decided that magic had to be banned. And there's an island where a group of rich people are playing around, and it's understood informally that magic is available. And this is a sort of witches blood magic, which is destructive and addictive, and characters are taken to doom or near doom, and it's all very atmospheric. And you know, it's the lesbian, pagan, witchy remake of the Great Gatsby that you didn't know you wanted, but you probably do want it, actually. Again, it's just a very interesting retell of the Central Triangle. When I say it's based on the Great Gatsby, obviously you can see it's supposed to be based on the Great Gatsby, and it is, but it's really quite different. I mean, some elements of the triangle are in there and so on, but I think it's a book that worked perfectly well if you didn't know the Great Gatsby reference. So that's your witches for today. And then the final book. I mean, sometimes it feels like when people have praised a book to the skies, why should you praise it? Well, sometimes a book is praised to the skies because it actually deserves it. I thought that Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell, was extraordinary. It's one of those books you read and go, oh heavens, the world has changed. This is a really sharp, new take on fantasy, very clearly set in the era it's supposed to be set in. And Susanna Clarke was, it's publicly known, ill for a long time, and therefore wrote almost nothing, having thrown fantasy into a ferment of change, did nothing for 10 years, and then came out because she was ill, and then came out with Piranesi, which has won all sorts of awards, which has deserved to win all sorts of awards. It's a sort of book, when you read it, you do kind of think you ought to give up, and then you think, well, you know, there's still room in the bookshelves for books that aren't quite as good as Piranesi. So the thing I will say about this book is you have to believe that Susanna Clarke is a master storyteller, and she will get you to the end of the maze that she makes. It's about a man who lives in a maze full of sort of like classical statuary and halls, and it's all very pedantic as he tries to remember where things are and what needs to be done. There's a bit of sort of obsessiveness in it. It's a bit like Gormenghast. And the sea comes in and floods parts of it, and Piranesi's almost on his own. He doesn't really remember who he is or where he comes from. And it's really obvious to us that there's something quite sinister going on. And but you have to believe that this labyrinthine book about a guy who's stuck in a labyrinth and who doesn't know what's going on will land, will tell you what's going on. It all makes sense, and her prose is great, and she draws you in. So I'm sure there are plenty of people who give up a third of the way through, but I say to you, persevere. There is a route out, and it's just astonishing. It's just a really great book. I think it's always great to write a book and people go, well, you know, this is not a rewrite of X. It's something of which rewrites will be done, and they won't be as good, but they might be interesting. So there we go. I mean, it's 5 books. I had to have a system, so I'd say they all had to be by women, and they all had to be books, not novels. And I've still got plenty of books on to talk about, but I just think it's really interesting that they talk about some really deep stuff in very interesting ways, while being in no sense ordinary run-of-the-mill novels. As you know, I'm firmly of the view that if you want to talk about real stuff, sometimes the way to talk about that is to talk about unreal stuff and let people draw the dots themselves. So this is a trial. I'll see how it goes, and I might do some more. Thank you very much, and signing off if I can work out how.